Welcome to the November 4th Jail and Zones production user call. We have Joseph, Goran, Jan, Jamie, Dave, and myself, Michael, so far. And Joseph needs to communicate to some colleagues the advantages of FreeBSD over Kubernetes. Could one of you give an overview of what Kubernetes does well and what people love it for? Dave, looking at you.
You wanted me to give the overview of
Well,
Kubernetes. That's not my cup of tea.
is
I,
it not? But you've got the alternative. So, who do we have who can give the broad pitch that everyone's hearing?
The the main advantage I'm hearing is that, so first off, it will run containers. So to people who are used to VMs, it's much lighter weight. Uh, it also allows you to set up a cluster that will run the containers. So you can perhaps not worry about where exactly the compute is happening. It just magically occurs somewhere on your pile of hardware. Um, there are managed offerings from cloud providers. This one sounds like it's got more weight than it should, but it implicitly confers blessing from every cloud provider, which CTOs like. And then there's two other things. There's the it's not exactly configuration management, but Helm charts let you sort of structure some of the configuration around what containers depend on each other, which need to talk to each other, and injecting things like environment variables into them. Um, is at least one way of documenting the setup, and people assume that it allows you to transfer that between different Kubernetes clusters and that sort of thing. And then the last thing is, because it has integrated service discovery, it plays nicely with a lot of pull-based monitoring and observability stuff. So you don't have to go through the headaches of building scalable monitoring with push-based architecture like we were shooting for 10, 15 years ago. Um, it now lets you just sort of plug monitoring and stuff on top of it. Those are the things that I have heard before.
These
I
days,
think
there's one more, which is
Mhm.
everyone is already using it, at least the cool kids. So
Sure.
kind of the your nose betting on the winning horse.
Right, but people are also using Windows. So
that's
like, what?
so I'm just saying you should add, and it runs Linux containers. That's a huge plus for people, right? So the argument for using FreeBSD is we think
Mhm.
FreeBSD is better for aesthetic reasons, functionality, performance, all of these sorts of relatively arbitrary things. But then someone says, well, I have this Java app from vendor X, which is critical to our business, and it doesn't run on FreeBSD. And you go, oh, okay, then we've got to do Kubernetes. Um, so Linux container compatibility is huge. It's embedded in GitHub CI. Every CI vendor provides that now. So, and I think the other thing is scale. If you need to run, so I've worked for companies who need to run sort of 10,000 VMs, and moving to containers saved them an awful lot of money, an
Mhm.
awful lot of money. And I don't think today people running thousands and thousands of systems. I think it's hard on Linux, and it's even harder on FreeBSD, I think. The
Okay.
big argument for me for rolling the stuff yourself is that you save an enormous amount of money if you don't use cloud providers. Cloud provider markup is enormous. And they've structured in such a way that if you're running out of RAM, you need to pay more. If you're running out of disk, you need to pay more. You're running out of IO, you need to pay more. And if you run out of any one of those, you've got to pay more across the board for capacity that you're not really using. It's what's the word I'm looking for here?
Yep.
Bundling and unbundling, that's how you make money.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, like
you're running on Kubernetes, right? That's not a disagreement for running Kubernetes. It's just if you're not worried about how much it costs, then managed Kubernetes is pretty neat.
okay.
Yeah, I think, yeah. For me, the big, like the 2 or 3 key factors where I go, where would I prefer FreeBSD over Kubernetes in general, not assuming that I don't want to use FreeBSD just because I want to use FreeBSD, is the really tight integration with ZFS. It's such a win in a way that you don't have that on Linux. You can pay for suppliers who will provide you with a setup that does that. I think
kind of. Like, but the Docker ZFS integration, it's present, but it is nowhere near as like just taken into account into all the tools that do container stuff. Like with Jails, everyone assumes you're doing it with ZFS, and so they will talk you through using it from day one.
Yeah.
With Docker, they assume that you're using these like crazy volumes that have no features whatsoever by default. And if you want features like, I don't know, a snapshot, that's weird. And okay, well, let's make sure that and none of our assumptions have been violated in order to get even BTRFS capabilities, much less CFS.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is still the case, but there was a time probably like 5-6 years ago where the network performance on Linux of containers was significantly less than it was on FreeBSD with Jails. And that may not be the case anymore, but for some people that matters. I've never worked with a customer where that would be an issue, like in 10 years. So, before that, yes, but now not. But that maybe that matters for some people. Those would be my 2 things. You want native performance, then you need native containers like Jails, with the caveat that only certain flavors of Jails give you that performance, and the other one is tight integration with ZFS. But comparing apples and apples, if you have all this Kubernetes stuff where there's dynamic assignment of resources and workloads to the right servers, making sure that your 3-node cluster always runs on 3 separate physical servers, even though it's containers, you either go for Nomad with Jails, which is possible, or you roll your own. And I think the maturity in the FreeBSD space of this sort of Kubernetes-like thing, where a CTO looks at the whole thing and goes, okay, I'm getting a bunch of servers. I can afford to have like 5 people who look after this 24/7. We don't have that story in FreeBSD. We might do next year, but we definitely don't this year.
Okay.
Yeah. Depends on
so
what
for a startup whose business, like the differentiator is not around saving infrastructure costs. They've got a big bucket from, say, Azure, and they'd rather spend it first than try and optimize their infrastructure to be, actually self-hosted and long-term cost-effective.
Yeah. So
that does make a really good argument.
You're a startup. You've been given like $100K of free money from Microsoft, and you've got like 5 engineers, and what you want is to spend 0 time on infrastructure. And if you go down the FreeBSD part, you have to build all these little bits yourself. They're not hard. And at the end of that, you have something which will be significantly cheaper than the overall cloud solution. But that doesn't matter for a startup, because that few weeks of spending that time building your own stuff to save money in 3 months' time is 1 month of runway that you lost to actually get your next round of funding. So startups is all about getting to the next gate of funding, and that's why Microsoft and Google and other companies give away so much free resources, because they know that for the 1 in 10 startups that get past that first year, then they will just continue using that infrastructure and paying through the nose for it, but they'll be paying with venture capital funding, and they won't care about how much it actually costs. So if that was me today and someone said you've got 100K of free money and you've got a startup, I would go, okay, what is the easiest path? I'm going to use Linux containers. I'm going to use whatever hosted CI is provided by the provider that got the money at, and I'll be up and running in no time. But if it was my own business and my own money, I would do this with FreeBSD, because I know, and on bare metal, because I know that I will save the money over time, and that matters to me. Yeah. So it's probably a very contrary view to what we were expecting here.
So
I don't know what other people feel.
one of the reasons
Sorry,
when it
John?
comes to performance, and especially networking performance, is that Jails started out with alias networking, which is basically free from a performance cost. At the beginning, where stuff like Docker started out with, oh, let's just do a NAT and port forwarding to an internal bridge, which you can do, and since like previously, what is it? Well, whenever VNet became stable enough, long time ago, but it has a noticeable performance overhead. These days, you have container runtimes which can reduce the overhead compared to having an internal bridge and then a stateful firewall which does port forwarding and which actually works with IPv6. The cleanest, if you have enough hardware to throw out the problem, is the same you have in FreeBSD, which is to use a single root I/O virtualization. So you pass virtual functions into your jails or network namespaces in Linux. That works well. There are neat hacks where you use routing, like what is it, Calico or something, where they actually use BGP as a signaling to manage a stateless firewall, which is effectively just access control lists to partition the network between your tenants. It's a clean solution, and it doesn't have to have much overhead. In Linux, they have also accelerated this with certain network cards to do the stateless packet inspection and forwarding in SmartNICs. FreeBSD doesn't have anything built, assembled into a ready-to-use product for this. Yeah. But it is true that FreeBSD VNet jails have the overhead of having to get packets out of each network stack. If you have the PCI Express virtual function to do that, that's effectively free because it's done by the hardware you have already paid for. If you do it in software, there's overhead to that. Doesn't matter which software implementation you use.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the overhead can vary by at least an order of magnitude between implementations of doing it well and doing it by just cobbling together existing flexible enough components.
Well, the thing I'm thinking about in the medium term is there's so there's a lot of sort of prototypey, like this will be in Python or Node.js, and it's more important to be able to deliver features faster. But there's one component that's sort of the backbone of the group's project that is sort of like a special purpose load balancer. Like it's pretty equivalent to to Nginx or
Traffic.
that sort of thing in a load balancer configuration, and it's really gonna care about latencies. And you're not really gonna want to horizontally scale it, because that becomes like you can shard those things, but it's really a lot nicer on everybody's minds if you just have a really big fat load balancer in the middle and it
Mm.
handles the horizontal scaling, but you don't want a horizontally scaled load balancer. That's a nightmare. Um, so I'm
So
wondering if that may be the one area where I definitely want to have a plan to get FreeBSD on bare metal for their
I,
hosted offering.
I
And then they can have Kubernetes for all the other stuff.
so one of the problems here is that oftentimes, especially when kind of the compute meets the network, you
Mm,
have different silos in organizations,
yes.
and you can do so much better than the common solutions we find, both with virtual machine hosting and container hosting,
Mm,
when you break down the silo barrier between compute and networking. Because the compute people are kind of often kept out of networking
mhm.
concepts and not allowed to get access to that, and are afraid of that in turn. So that means that they kind of assume that everything is a flat bridge network of Ethernet and everything else is weird and annoying. And yeah, they assume that you just basically use whatever glue you need, be that VXLAN, be that VLAN, be that some other software-defined networking solution to extend a flat layer to between as many compute instances as they desire, so that they can just have a flat subnet and maybe dynamic DNS. Because these people
And then
are not
it looks
allowed to play
basic.
with
Yeah.
routing. So, for example, in
Yeah.
FreeBSD, it's so much faster and easier, and you can make use of multi-path routing and so on if you just have um, a routed network. So you can run VNet jails. So in Linux terminology, that would be containers with their own network stack and so on. So network namespace with own interfaces. But how do you hook that to the network? The common solution is give them something which feels like an Ethernet interface. So in the worst case, they even run DHCP on that. In a better world, we could just have a big enough prefix routed via your IGP to each of your physical systems, and then you would just redistribute the attached container network interfaces into your IGP. And if you had to move some IP address, it would just be a more specific route. And as long as you don't have too many of those, your routing infrastructure will not complain. So yeah, but that requires that you actually have the buy-in from networking and server hosting teams, and you don't have different managers fighting over their turfs with dysfunctional interfaces between the silos. Yeah, so it's not going away, that inefficiency. And the other problem, especially for smaller deployments, is why I didn't deploy that and at work for me is that I know it would have a bus factor of 1, because good luck trying to find someone who feels comfortable uh, debugging both ZFS, jails, and BGP and OSPF interactions all at the same time.
That sounds like a lot of job security for you, Jan.
Yeah, it also means that if anything blows up, I get broken up.
I mean,
So
I know I can't handle all of that. The networking stuff is frequently above my head. So,
the
yeah,
funny thing is that it's not that hard once you have a mental concept of it. If you have a few months to play with that, in your spare time in a lab environment, you will feel a lot more comfortable doing something like that. But you won't find a lot of people you can just hire with that skill set. Which also brings me to something which I realized during the preparation for my EuroBSDCon talk, that the Linux container ecosystem has codified a mistake they made in the specifications, and that is that their semantics is all around individual files. So the whole layering is tarballs of files and not file systems, which means you either need a very flexible overlay file system, which can do the overlaying at runtime with a low enough overhead. So you can't do it with Fuse because that's too slow. But if you just lay out your file system in a not intentionally stupid way, you can always get away with doing it with file system level, which means you can employ ZFS to its fullest and then use whenever you need a read-only application, whatever, you just have a ZFS clone for that. You have to be careful with ZFS clones that you never lock any changes into a clone which you want to preserve, because you can't rebase the changes into a new clone. But as long as you do what I did for my talk, you can hopefully see the recording soon. This can be done with just ZFS, and means that you can quickly deploy and ensure by construction that your containers are stateless, except for the few file systems you created to intentionally hold state. And that's something we can build with Jails, but right now there is no ready-to-use tool for it. You have to assemble it yourself. So once again, FreeBSD has the mechanisms, but not the opinionated tool which makes it easy to consume.
I feel like that covers all of the edge cases I was wondering about. Do we have anything else we want to say about Kubernetes and related tech, or should we move on to another another topic?
So
I have to leave in about 4 minutes. So
one thing which would worry me about Kubernetes for small teams is that it's too damn easy to accumulate mountains of technical debt without noticing it.
well,
Seen it
don't worry,
explode on people.
they've got vibe coding to handle that for them.
Yeah, but with Helm charts written by competent people, you can assemble your tower a lot higher before it collapses on top of you.
Oh man. AI assisted programming plus that sounds really, really exciting. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to be very stressed about that from now on. Great.
Vibe coding cleanup is going to be a growth industry.
I mean, I can tell you the startup that I'm talking to, they're an AI safety platform that is trying that basically it's trying to be like, hey, maybe you want to have some guardrails before you bring AI into your enterprise. Why don't you, you know, maybe at least have an audit log of what people are doing with it inside your business and that kind of stuff.
Oh.
Um, so it is like the least possible protection against AI, but at least it's sort of they're trying to start heading in the right direction, and I'm looking forward to seeing more startups that are like, AI is just a thing now, so I guess we better protect against it.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate it. I'm actually going to drop off and
What thoughts that jail
Okay.
capsules?
yeah,
Cheerio, Joseph. Thanks.
see ya. Thank you so much.
Yeah, bye bye.
This is the thing from Kevin, sorry, from Kyle. Kyle, from the beginning of September that I only just read because EuroBSD sort of flowed over all of that. And I think Jamie's already replied to this.
Yeah, just
Um,
realized I hadn't seen it.
One thing I think which would make jails more secure would be to isolate the host from seeing into the jail, so that you do not do the stupid thing people do, which is documented like, oh, upgrade your jail from the host by running make install world install kernel des dir slash jails my jail. Because guess what? The make targets are not properly jailing themselves. So if you have evil sublinks in there, bad stuff can happen. Especially when you run a make distribution.
So you mean hiding the jailed file system from the host system?
Yes.
Okay.
The file system is the most obvious namespace, but by default, it kind of you would also hide the processes. Not completely. There has to be a way to look into the, but just that the default is it's not visible unless you ask for it. It's fine if it still
Ah,
exists in the same process namespace, but you shouldn't be seeing it on top to accidentally send it a signal into a jail, something.
okay. That would require a change of a lot of system calls, I would think. Send a signal to a process, send a signal to a jailed process, things like that.
That maybe I don't know how you would implement that. If it would be two system calls, if it would be a flag you give, or if you would only exempt it from the listing by default, so that you could still send the signal. But the other thing is, which has repeatedly come up in the jail exploitation I've done, which you've been involved in, Jamie, is the problem that if you have any kind of es escape between jails or between hosting jail, it makes the attacker's life easier that jails use the same user ID and group ID namespace as other jails and the host. So the ability to kind of
Yeah.
add the jail ID to the user ID and PID namespace would, I think, be the cleanest one, rather than trying to do what Linux did and have a mapping, instead extended to a bigger integer, which is internally a tuple of jail ID and process ID and user jail ID and user ID. And that makes it easy so that for compatibility purposes where you want, you can kind of say, hey, if the upper half of the pair is 0, fill in a default value, which would probably mean either wildcard or your current jail ID.
Yeah, I think your current jail ID, unless you specify
Yeah.
a jail and maybe some other wildcard value that you could have a -1 or something.
Technically, so, and I don't think it's an urgent issue, but it's one which could be addressed in time for 16, and it definitely means either doing nasty mappings like you do in Linux, or it means increasing the size of PIDs and user IDs to
Not
64-bit.
really increasing the size of them, but increasing the things that store them to also store jail IDs. I'd still rather keep them as distinct identifiers.
Okay, but at some point you have to be able to return them as a single number. And the
Why?
logical way to do that would be to encode it in one double-sized integer, so 64-bit, so that you can pretend it's just a number. It's just a scalar type, right? Because a bunch of things require PID t to be some kind of integer, but I don't think there's a requirement for it to be no larger than an integer. At least I don't know this to be. Maybe someone has to look in POSIX if it really is PID-T and UID-T and so on must be no larger than an int. I'm sure there is code out there that assumes it, but at least I think if we can get away with making it a 64-bit integer, that would be the best way to be API compatible.
I'm seeing a problem from the other direction, though. I'm seeing someone saying, my file system has 64-bit user IDs already. I don't want to reduce the user ID space because that could break files on my file system.
Right now, you don't anyway. So that no file system we have implemented so far can do that, because right now, as far as I know, UID and GID are 32-bit integers.
Okay.
So yeah, there's one doubling which is available, I think. I haven't done all the deep research.
These are all implementation details that detract from the statement of the idea.
Mm-hmm. And nothing in that idea means that you can't combine them in the last line of the system call, where you just bit shift in the jail ID in the upper bits, right?
Right.
So
it's
you
just,
can store them.
It's in the weeds right now. I would call the different ways of doing it at this point, different ways of doing it, and not worry about it at this point.
Yeah.
The general idea of containing the jail namespace makes sense.
Yeah. But for file systems, doing this would mean that there needs to be some kind of overlay file system which does the translation, so that you don't have to own all the files in a jail whenever the jail ID changes.
Yes, and that gets into a lot of tracking of things. Yeah.
And FreeBSD used to have a solution for that.
Okay, which is?
Or was it 6.4? We once had something, Mount UMap FS here. Let's see if it's still in 7.
Oh yeah, that does sound familiar now that you mentioned.
So we used to have this pseudo file system, but it didn't make it when the virtual file system moved out from under the giant lock in 7. So this feature got kind of crippled to what's needed by NFS to map root and map everybody. It's no longer at least exposed as a pseudo file system. But something like this would have to be brought back if we have this extended user and group ID space, which includes the jail ID, whether it's its own thing or combined into one bigger integer type as bit fields in a register.
do we have to have a new file system, or would it just be part of the VFS layer saying, here is the file system's stored user ID, and we automatically always convert that into a logical
I guess
user
if
ID?
you commit to always only using it for jails, you could get away with assigning the mount point a jail ID,
Yeah.
and then you could simplify that. But this kind of thing would also be interesting for other things. Be that change root environments, be that quick CI setups. I can see multiple uses for it. But of course, for the jail mount point, when you assume that jails have whole mount points to themselves, and you don't do the old-fashioned thing of having multiple jails in the same file system, then you can just assign jails file systems a jail. But that requires that the namespace in the file system is kind of extended to that. And it could become a problem for nested jails where parent and child have the same file system root directory.
Yeah.
But I think we've spent enough time on that implementation detail.
Agreed.
Yep. Yeah, to me, it sounds a lot like some kind of secure enclave concept. If you really try to protect something from the host's root, uh, I don't think you're going to get very far as long as there's destructive dtrace or a kernel debugger in range. So I really think it's important what you want to use it for. Uh, oh, only Ran and you are left. So maybe we should just quickly continue to the Nomad stuff or better even skip over it and come to Goran's KQ. Goran, you're muted.
Well, I don't think we can add anything to the KQ anymore at this point.
Do you have any link you can put in the chat for me to look at? Whatever you're
Not
working on.
not yet, because I first wrote the man page, then the suggestion was that the language is more suited for development handbook, and then I think Mark J remembered, hey, we have this in share example KLD, we already have examples, maybe write it there.
Yeah,
So
this
that happened a few days ago, so I haven't yet started working on it because usually I'm free on weekends.
so I think this would be a great content to go into the articles category of the FreeBSD documentation.
Maybe, yeah.
So where you have kind of single topic articles. Or some of them are like practical RC.D scripting are on the larger side. But stuff like uh, ancient volume management or VPN over IPsec, writing your own geom class, and this would be writing your own KQ filter.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out.
And yeah, just whatever format you want to put it in. I'm happy to play my role as reviewer. Do we have any other topics?
None by me.
I thought you were gonna talk about Nomad,
Yeah.
Jan.
So I played around with Nomad. It's kind of a single company implementation of the same ideas as Kubernetes. So you have the layering where you have console as your distributed hierarchical key value store and kind of monitoring system. And then you have Nomad as the job scheduler on top of that. And if you look into Nomad, you will find that there are already three different task drivers. A task is the kind of job you run on top of Nomad, your container workload, but it can also be a virtual machine or even just a local process. And we have task drivers for jail.conf jails, and then for a special kind of jail, and then for pod jails. So there are examples here. What's kind of missing is a good storage provider and complicated network integrations. But you can make it work on FreeBSD. Pizza with his pod jail manager has written a task driver to run pod jails with it and basically get the Kubernetes experience in a parallel reality where you're using FreeBSD and Nomad as your runtime.
Is the Nomad also at least stored by Picamiglio?
Huh?
Is Picamiglio also the author of Nomad? I know he
No,
wrote Pot.
it's one of the HashiCorp's tech stack.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And where is the documentation? Uh, so it's already a few years old, but so they're using Graphic instead of Nginx or HA proxy in this example. You have your console server running on every. Sorry, you kind of want to have your console servers be configured so that you have 3 or 5, potentially 7 if you're very paranoid, true console servers which participate in the consensus, sorry, in the quorum, and then just read-only followers on the other server so that you have the service available on a local Unix socket. Um, and Nomad builds on top of the abstractions offered by Consul. It also adds a lot of its own. And then it forms its own Chrome of master servers. And then you have the actual Nomad clients, which run the same software in a different configuration. So these servers are where your control plane lives. These would be the ones where you run your jails. And some of the networking stuff probably lives kind of in a special place where it's either not managed by Nomad or it's put in a special statically allocated location so that it can interface with your network. So you may want this for health monitoring, your redundant pair of load balancers or something like this. but you probably don't want your load balancer to be dynamically moved around because it would be annoying and hard to integrate because then its IP space would have to follow it. So then you need integration with your routing and so on. It's probably easier to form all but the most elaborate of deployments for this to be static, even if it's under Nomad management. So Pod is already a fairly advanced jail manager. It has the ability to create images, which are ZFS replication streams of jails, similar but not the same as you can use Podman for this, because it's ZFS replication streams, not tarballs. You can pull them in from a catalog, which is just a static HTTP or HTTPS server, which hosts the replication streams. There isn't much metadata. And because Nomad is extensible, you can just write your own like 200 lines of Python to write a task driver. And here is one. I hope the link still works. Yep. And it's still more or less actively maintained. Oh, it's not. So it moved to Codeberg. Okay, fair enough. And this is then how you would describe a job. You say which data center, that it's a service you want to run. You can group. This is kind of like in Kubernetes, you have the sidecars. And then you have the service, you tag it, and you describe how to health check it, and then how to configure it. In this case, it would run an Nginx pod. Here, the command you run is Nginx, and the list of arguments you give the command is you configure, you copy some file in, you mount some directory, you configure the port mapping because by default port wants to use the Docker-like networking approach where you have PF with NAT configured and then configure port forwardings. This uses FreeBSD hierarchical resource limits to do the traffic shaping and other resource limitations. Yeah, and this is the problem they had, that they can't use non-persistent jails because then the jail could disappear without the task driver. That's the module which integrates a specific kind of task, in this case jails, with the Nomad job scheduler. It has to be in charge of creation and destruction, and if it just goes away, that's really annoying. But now that we have jail descriptors and tracking by jail ID for FreeBSD 15, the jail command in theory could just stick around until the jail dies, as we discussed 1 or 2 weeks ago, so that you have a jail command which matches the lifetime of the jail. The only thing you can't do in this model is you can't have a pre-stop hook running inside the jail if you get told that the jail died. I would argue that if the jail died, there's no reason to do anything because there's no process you have to cleanly shut down anymore. And you can do stuff like removing the died jail from load balancers in the post-stop hook on the host. This mini pod is basically this like a single node Kubernetes deployment. I forgot the name of the stuff which so many people use to play around with Kubernetes in a single system. Flavors are basically templates because it's called pod and everything is kind of kitchen related in its terminology. So you have potluck is the repository and so on. Yeah, okay, he had the same idea of a JLD because that really makes it easier for some kind of job manager to track a jail if it is represented by a process rather than some entity which you create and which may disappear at any time. So I don't have a working Nomad pod lab set up right now. I had it working, but I destroyed the lab environment and tried something else. So I can't give you a live demo. So like and subscribe if anyone is crazy enough to ever listen to this.
All right. See you next week.